Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Zimbabwe is a country that is in serious trouble. I think one of the root causes of that is our failure to understand even the most elementary, or what one would think is elementary stuff. One question that many people should have asked themselves by now is, why have the people of Zimbabwe been risking their livelihoods, limbs, and even lives voting for MDC Triple C? Why do we need the opposition? If you have not asked yourself that question, and yet for the last 25 years, you have been voting for these people, you've got to ask yourself, so why were you voting for them? You don't know what you want them to do, and yet you keep voting for them. That is a recipe for disaster. You are voting, you're risking your own livelihoods, your limbs, and many people have lost their lives. In 2008, during those elections, as many as 500 people lost their lives during the runoff at the hands of ZANU-PF, the Operation Mafotela Party. All those people lost their lives for what? They were voting to put MDC Triple C in power. To do what? That is a fundamental question. It is, of course, no surprise that the electorate do not know the answer. And even those who were voted for, the leaders themselves, do not know the answer. As much as some of them would articulate the answer, they're paying lip service. Here is Morgan Tsvangirai trying to explain why the MDC existed.
The governance culture is just replacing one individual with another individual with the same character, same culture. So I think it is foolhardy to think that replacing Mugabe with Emmerson Mnangagwa without the fundamental reforms that are needed to transform the institution of governance, then you're wasting your time. You just have the same perpetuation of the same culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How was your working relationship with Mnangagwa during the gym?
Well,
the key point there is Morgan Tsvangirai himself accepted the reality that we need to implement democratic reforms to change our political system. That is the number one task that people of Zimbabwe have risked everything to elect the MDC Triple C leaders in power these last 25 years. Whoever was asking him, he should have followed that up and said, well, so if you appreciate that you needed to implement reforms, why haven't you implemented any reforms? If we look at now, we're looking at MDC, Triple C have been on the political stage for the last 25 years. ZANU-PF blatantly rigged the 2023 elections. Proof that no meaningful reforms have been implemented. So we go back to the question, why has MDC Triple C failed to implement any meaningful reforms? In 25 years. And I think the other important point is to say in those 25 years, when did they have their best chance of implementing the reforms? Anyone who has been following the politics will tell you that MDC Triple C guys had their golden opportunity to implement the reforms during the GNU, the Government of National Unity of 2008 to 2013. That GNU was formed as a result of SADC putting pressure on Mugabe to sign the Global Political Agreement of 2008, which gave birth to the GNU. And the Global Political Agreement and the number one task of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms to stop a repeat of what had happened in 2008, the 2008 elections. The March vote, as much as it came to the closest Zimbabwe has ever come to holding free, fair, credible elections, before the results could be declared, Mnangagwa and company stepped in, taken over the whole process, went on to spend the next 5-6 weeks counting 5 million votes. And one notable thing was to whittle down Tsvangirai's vote, giving him 47%, just enough to force the runoff. And during the runoff, ZANU-PF used wanton violence. SADC refused to accept ZANU-PF as the winner and forced Mugabe to sign the Global Political Agreement. So the question then is, if the GNU was the golden opportunity to implement the reforms, why did they fail to implement reforms? Answer: Mugabe bribed them. He bribed Tsvangirai and company with a ministerial E-Class Mercedes-Benz limos for ministerial limos, the very generous salaries, and for Morgan Tsvangirai himself, the $4 million mansion in Highlands, etc., etc. And the MDC leaders completely forgot about implementing reforms. Ever since the GNU debacle, MDC Triple C leaders have participated in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process was being rigged, and knowing fully well that participating would only give ZANU-PF legitimacy. They participated out of greed. This is a reality that cannot be denied. And yet, people like Chamisa will try to deny it. He is the one in 2023, for instance, who told the people that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Triple C was going to win big. He was lying, of course. And when he was challenged about the lie, he denies that he wasn't lying. In this video clip, we have Chamisa speaking in the rural areas, telling the rural people that he is not going to join in the street protests because God has instructed him that he should not go on the street and cause the shedding of blood. Let's just listen to what he had to say.
Mkomana sei ari kutaura nyaya dzemavhesi, sei mukomana ari mushoko, inzwaika. Nyaya iripo ndeyekuti unopenyerwa. Kana wapenyerwa wozanzi nyika kuti uigadzire, handisi kuzoigadzira nemunhu asina kunzwa kwandiri. Ava vanonzwa kumashavi, iwe inzwa kumweya mutsvene. Machinzwe? Kana musinganzwi hakuna kwamunoiswa nashe. I'm saying this now. Chero mukarekodha vakomana nevasikana. I'm saying it on record. Mwari vanoda kuti nyika ino ivakwe nemaoko akachena. Kwete vanhu vanodeura ropa revanhu. Kwete vanhu vanouraya. Kwete vanhu vanoponda. Kwete vanhu vanoba. That is what must transform our country. Yes, chero zvikarema. Vanatsvangirai vakasvika pakuenda sina kuzadzikiswa, but takatosara takabata times 2. And hakuna zvaunondiita chero ukaisa mujere, ike zvino vanatimba vari mujere nana Chibaya, unogona kuvatimba uchivabaya uchivaisa mujere, but hakuna kwaunoenda. Kazhinji anosunga vamwe ndiye anenge ari jere guru. Ndakutyaka. Ukaona vaunosunga unomutya. Kurava kuti iwewe wauri kusunga uya, iwe uri mujere rakakura kudarika rari. Mazvizwe? Ndoramanidzika. Saka musabvunduka. Zvamunoona izvi imviro dzokuoneka. Hakuna muti unodonhesa mashizha usingakuvi. Apa unosvika. Nguva yakwana. Ende sitiripo kuti nguva iyo ikwane. We are ready. Tiri kuronga. Zvamunoona takadai kuronga zvokuronga zvi. Shamwari tiri kuruka. Pasi rose. Munamato takasunga. Ende tiri kunamatira kuti nyika idzikinurwe. Ndakanzi iwe usadeura ropa. Ndakati mundava ndopinda ndine vanhu mustreet ndikanzi mira mwana. Mira. Handidi kuti uite ropa. Ndau ukaita ropa handikuyambutsi. Oh yes. Muri kuzvinzwa? Nokuti nhasi chako ndichibva kuno, nhasi ndikati chipiri ndichishedzera munyika kuti vedu we ngatiite zvakati. Imi asi hatisati tasvika ikoko. Tinoita zvatine tatendedzwa. Savamwe munoti manonokerwa. Mirirai anotungamira masteps emuchando.
This is totally dishonest. If we go back to the video that I played earlier on. Of Changirai admitting that the key issue to change in Zimbabwe is implementing the democratic reforms. Here it is.
The governance culture is just replacing one individual with another individual with the same character, same culture. So I think it is foolhardy to think that replacing Mugabe with Emerson Mnangagwa without the fundamental reforms that are needed to transform the institution of governance, then you're wasting your time. You just have the same perpetuation of the same culture.
Yeah. How was your working relationship with Mnangagwa during the GNU?
Well,
the key point there is people are not going to have street protests. The street protests are not going to implement any reforms. So why are we putting so much emphasis on street protests? Why is the people who were involved, who had the golden opportunity to implement the reforms during the GNU, failed to implement even one reform? And now they're the ones who are saying street protests. This is just mind-blowing, idiotic argument. You failed to implement even one token reform when you had the best chance to do so during the GNU. Those who are saying we want street protests, how do you implement reforms in the street? Even if people joined in the street protests, at the present moment, the way we are going with this GESA 31st March uprising, even if it was successful, all you'll succeed in doing is replace Mnangagwa with Chiwenga. Anyone who thinks that Chiwenga is going to implement reforms is naive. Jamisa's strategy doesn't offer any hope either. He's talking of his praying for change. Well, you had the golden opportunity to implement the reforms during the GNU. Why didn't you? You are the one who participated in the 2018 elections, telling people that MDC alliance has stringent measures to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. And you were lying. You knew very well that by participating, you give ZANU-PF legitimacy. Then you did that, the same thing again in 2023. And you gave ZANU-PF legitimacy. And now you're telling us you are praying. There's something irrational with this whole argument. On this point of why did MDC leaders participate in flawed elections? Here is Margaret Longo speaking to that point.
Keep talking about corruption. How deep, how endemic is corruption in this country? From you, I mean, you sit in the Central Committee, and I'm sure you still have colleagues.
It's like tea. Chai, Kenyans call it chai. It's like tea. Now it's no longer in the hierarchy only. It's now it is developed even in the grassroots. It's even more ways in the grassroots because these are the grassroots people who see their leaders being corrupt. So they are thinking that it's a type of life that should exist. And then the corruption is shrunk right to the grassroots. There's now corruption everywhere. Worse off with the leadership. Because they have a look. You asked me a very good question. You were in the Central Committee. You were a member of Parliament. You were this and that. Why are you feeling the pinch? It's because, I didn't believe in corruption. I'm not a selfish person. I'm a selfless person. And I'm like a social worker. Politics is not a business. This is what I want to remind most of our MPs and other people.
Do you think they look at it as a business?
Yes, they look at it as a business. Because they look at it as a business seriously. Because the moment they go, business and employment creation. Because if they go to parliament, you are employed. You get a car, you get a stable salary, and you are paid until your term is over. Already you are employed. If you are out, you're out of employment.
If you serve 2 terms, you get a pension?
You get a pension. Then already, this is why people kill in politics. They kill to be in parliament. This is why we have violence in this country. Because there is no employment. The only employment which is there is in politics. There is no other outside employment. So for them, a very good example is, look at what happened to CCC, the Triple C party. Have a look. When they lost, when they said they were rigged, what I expected from them, I expected all parliamentarians to say, we are not going to go to participate in a rigged system. And we are not going to sit in a rigged parliament. Because the elections have been rigged. So all of us were not going to parliament. Imagine what could have happened. We could have gone into new elections. There's no way ZANU-PF was going to rule alone.
You think so?
Yes.
Do they care?
Caring or not caring, the public would have forced them because the majority of the people would want representation in parliament.
That is a key point. The people of Zimbabwe themselves should have a clear idea of what is it they want from their elected officials. If MDC leaders are participating in these elections out of greed, it is for the people themselves to say, no, we are not going to accept that. But if you don't, it's your fault. I believe many people out there, whether they care to admit it or not, they really have no clue why they've been electing members of parliament, the MDC, Triple C particularly. They've risked lives, livelihoods, limbs for the last 25 years, and you still have no idea why is it you're risking everything to elect somebody. The ancient Greeks were right. They say that democracy, as government of the people, by the people, for the people, only works if the people are educated, knowledgeable, diligent, and diligent in holding their leaders to account. I think the Zimbabwe voter is neither of those things. If you don't know why you're voting for somebody, how can you hold them to account? If you don't know why you're voting for somebody, if they fail to do the task that one should understand them they're being elected for, who is going to hold them to account? The people of Zimbabwe have been engrossed in slogans like change, ginger, and yet many of them have absolutely no clue what is it that we're asking to be changed. And as long as we have got an electorate that has no clue what the leaders are there for, the leaders will always exploit it. They will be telling them one thing today, another thing tomorrow. If this, as we approach 2028, Chamisa will once again be standing in as a presidential candidate. And this time you'll be telling the people, we are going to win. We are going to win big. And tell them yet another idiotic lie of how he has come up with a strategy of winning rigged elections. He's not denying that ZANU-PF is rigging the elections. What he's saying is have ways of winning those rigged elections, countering the rigging. And that day after the election, he'll be the one complaining that the elections were rigged. How many times do we have to hear this before we finally wake up? The number one purpose of MDC CCC leaders was to implement democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. In 25 years of MDC CCC on the political stage, they failed to implement even one token reform. That is the political reality that the people of Zimbabwe have got to accept. And in accepting it, they've got to ask themselves, if somebody has failed to implement even one token reform in 25 years, why should I vote for him or her? People get the government they deserve. And in Zimbabwe, we deserve this corrupt, incompetent, tyrannical ZANU-PF dictatorship, complete with its equally corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless MDC CCC opposition. That is the truth. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.